Hi there, this is Chris Jagger. I'm reading a few excerpts from my book, Talking to Myself, which I hope you'll enjoy. The Scene. I was 15 years old and already well primed in blues and R&B music when I first saw the prototype Rolling Stones perform in 1963. The venue was a Soho dive called The Scene in London's Piccadilly, and it was a Wednesday night. Dad had lent Mick the family Triumph Herald car to drive up to town. Borrowing the car was always a big issue between my father and brother, as any parent will know. We passed through the West End with Mick humming the Jimmy Reed song, Bright Lights, Big City, which was appropriate enough. We then parked up and descended into a small basement. I was left sipping lemonade at a table while Mick went off to get ready. The opening act was billed as Dave Green's R&B band, which slightly confused me as the lineup was more like a trad jazz outfit. Indeed, there was a great deal of debate at the time about what constituted this particular genre of R&B. Dave Green was in fact an old horn-playing jazz man who, wishing to keep gigs in the book, had added R&B as an appendage. The Stones then came on and fulfilled my expectations. This was exciting stuff, and I was swept along the spirit of the performance. Keith Richards was seesawing on the edge of a postage stamp-sized stage with his F-hole Gibson, dark hair protruding from under a black French beret, while blonde-mopped Brian Jones was on the opposite side, both complementing each other's styles, adding vocals and cranking up their Dartford-manufactured Vox amps. Looking every inch a student, which in fact he was, in his brown corduroy jacket, Mick barely had room to wiggle on the spot. There was no Bill Wyman or Charlie Watts then, as they hadn't yet joined the band. The drummer's name was Tony Chapman, a fair guy with a quiff, who I've never seen since. Dartford lad Dick Taylor was on bass, while Ian Stu Stewart tinkled away on the ivories, sounding good, but looking somewhat out of place, with swept back hair that dated from an earlier era. Charlie Watts likely had another gig that night, perhaps with bluesman Alexis Corner. It all sounded great to me as they ran through the many tunes I was familiar with from records and tape. The low spark of the high-heeled boys. Mick was relaxed about it all, so I took it all in my stride too, though of course it was quite a new experience for me. After the gig, we dropped off at a dilapidated terraced house in Chelsea, Edith Grove, then an unfashionable part of town, where Mick rented a room. Brian and Keith lived there too, lads loose in the big city having a whale of a time, always broken on the scrounge from visiting girlfriends or whoever walked through the door. But as the senior and already a father in name at least, Brian was a bigger presence, particularly as Keith was so shy. Records and guitars were strewn around the scruffy flat, so it was a place where tunes and ideas could be worked out and a good base from which to prowl around the city. We left, though, that night as Mick delivered me and the Triumph Herald back home in the early hours. I visited Edith Grove on other occasions and was intrigued to actually see the place reconstructed in the Stones exhibition in London in 2016. I could remember Brian seated on the floor analysing an Elmore James solo, copying the exact little traits that added up to the whole picture. Brian even gave himself the name Elmo Lewis at one point. There were no instruction videos back then. You had to deconstruct the arrangements to discover what was going on. Although seemingly quite straightforward, the blues has many little added bars and inflections, giving individual players their identities. Many early blues artists were illiterate anyway and had to rely on their memories. The better educated mainly confined their studies to the Bible. As Blind Willie Johnson sang, "Mama taught me how to read, and if I don't read, my soul be lost. Nobody's fault but mine."